all quite excited that it could be the so-called flood tunnel booby trap system. Of course, we're going to investigate.
There's definitely a void below these rocks.
It lines up exactly with the anomaly, so it is the anomaly.
For more than 230 years, Oak Island has remained one of the world's most mysterious treasure hunts. Countless expeditions have searched beneath its soil. Millions of dollars have been spent, and the island has been drilled again and again, all in the hope of finding what has been hidden there since 1795. But now, a discovery that first looked almost insignificant may have changed everything. The team has uncovered a massive iron spike buried in an area already surrounded by strange underground signals. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a piece of heavily corroded old metal. But when researchers compared its exact location with historical maps, ground scans, and previously detected anomalies, something unexpected began to emerge. Just beyond the location of the spike, scans appeared to reveal a large geometric structure beneath the ground. And then came the number that made the discovery even more shocking: $350 million. Early estimates suggested that the underground anomaly could potentially be connected to a massive hidden vault. But what could actually be inside? Gold? Silver? Centuries-old coins? Or could this finally be connected to the legendary treasure that has kept treasure hunters searching Oak Island for more than 2 centuries? Even more intriguing, the team discovered a possible connection between the iron spike and the underground structure, one that could completely change the direction of the investigation. And if you want to see exactly what the team discovered beneath Oak Island, stay with us until the very end. But before we uncover the next clue, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because if Oak Island finally gives up its biggest secret, you won't want to miss it. Because this time, one small piece of iron may be pointing towards something much, much bigger. The latest investigation on Oak Island did not begin with the discovery of a giant treasure chest or a hidden chamber. It started much more quietly. The team was revisiting a section of the island where earlier scans had detected strange underground anomalies. As the excavator carefully removed layer after layer of soil, every piece of material was being examined. Then, suddenly, something long and metallic appeared in the dirt. The object was pulled free, revealing a large iron spike. At first, it seemed like a relatively ordinary discovery. Oak Island has produced plenty of old nails, tools, metal fragments, and other objects over the years. But this particular piece immediately caught the team's attention. Its shape didn't resemble a modern nail. The metal was heavily corroded, the edges were uneven, and its overall appearance suggested considerable age. More importantly, its construction appeared consistent with something that may have been made by hand rather than produced by modern machinery. And that raised an entirely new set of questions. Could the spike have belonged to an ancient wooden structure? Was it once used to hold together a platform? Could it have supported a tunnel? Or was it connected to some type of underground entrance whose remains researchers had been searching for all these years? But the biggest mystery wasn't actually the spike itself. It was where the spike was found. The object had been recovered remarkably close to an area where underground scans had already detected unusual patterns. If the spike was once part of a larger structure, then perhaps the strange signals beneath the ground and this seemingly insignificant piece of iron were actually connected. After more than 2 centuries of searching, Oak Island has produced countless clues. Yet history has shown that sometimes the smallest discovery can open the door to a much larger mystery. And now, one question was becoming impossible to ignore. Could this iron spike represent the first physical evidence of a hidden route beneath Oak Island? To understand what made this object so important, the team began examining it in much greater detail. Once the dirt had been carefully removed, researchers inspected the spike's shape, surface, and condition. It was clearly large, heavily weathered, and far from perfectly uniform. The extensive corrosion suggested that it had spent a considerable amount of time buried underground. Those characteristics strengthened the possibility that the object could have been manufactured using older techniques. The idea of hand forging became especially interesting. Before modern industrial manufacturing, blacksmiths would heat iron until it became workable and then shape it with repeated hammer strikes. Large forged spikes could be used for a variety of heavy construction projects, including securing massive wooden beams, supporting mining structures, constructing wharfs, or reinforcing large timber frameworks. If the Oak Island spike had actually been produced in this way, its significance could be far greater than anyone initially realized. But appearance alone wasn't enough. The next step was to determine exactly what the spike was made of and whether its material could provide clues about its age. Researchers would need to examine its composition, manufacturing characteristics, corrosion patterns, and the layer of soil in which it had been discovered. Those details could then be compared with other archaeological evidence from the island. Because if testing eventually showed that the spike was significantly older than the beginning of Oak Island's famous treasure hunt in 1795, an even more difficult question would emerge. Who was carrying out large-scale wooden construction on this island before the treasure hunt even began? One possibility was that the spike had once belonged to a substantial timber structure, a platform, a tunnel support system, or perhaps construction associated with an underground entrance. Of course, no treasure had been confirmed. Not yet. But if researchers could establish a genuine connection between the spike and the strange underground signals detected nearby, this small piece of metal could become the starting point for a much larger discovery. And that's why the location of the spike mattered so much. On Oak Island, what an object is can sometimes be less important than exactly where it was found. The spike had emerged from a section of the island already under investigation because of signs of unusual underground activity. As excavation continued around the discovery site, additional clues began appearing. Small fragments of wood were uncovered within some of the surrounding layers. Other nearby traces of metal also drew the team's attention. Suddenly, the possibility of a larger structure seemed harder to ignore. Were these fragments and metal traces simply unrelated objects accumulated over centuries? Or were they remnants of the same forgotten construction? To answer that question, the team began comparing the discovery site with historical maps, old records, and information collected during previous investigations. And that's when the investigation took another unexpected turn. What had once been treated as an ordinary search area was suddenly starting to look much more significant. The location seemed to bring together several pieces of evidence from different periods of Oak Island's long history. Over the past 230 years, researchers have uncovered wooden remains, metal objects, underground anomalies, and traces of possible structures across the island. But when discoveries made at different times begin pointing toward the same location, the possibility of a larger connection becomes much harder to ignore. That was exactly why the team decided to widen the investigation. Instead of focusing only on the spot where the spike had been recovered, they planned to break the surrounding area into smaller sections, scan each section independently, and carefully examine the soil around the discovery site. The main question was simple. Was the iron spike an isolated object, or was it the surviving piece of something much larger? If a substantial wooden structure had once stood here, there had to be a reason for it. Perhaps it was simply evidence of old construction activity. But what if it had served a much more important purpose? What if it had been connected to a route leading below the surface? That possibility became even more interesting when researchers began examining the theory surrounding the alleged $350 million treasure vault. The theory wasn't based on a single mysterious reading. Instead, it was the combination of the spike's location, previous discoveries, and newly collected underground data that was beginning to attract attention. The ground scan reveals something unexpected. The team already knew the area was unusual, but the real excitement began when they brought in ground-penetrating radar and other advanced scanning equipment. The objective was straightforward. They needed to determine whether the iron spike was the only unusual evidence in the area, or whether something significant was buried directly beneath it. Then, the scan results appeared. An unusual signal emerged beneath the surface. What made it particularly interesting was its apparent direction. The anomaly seemed to continue away from the location where the spike had been discovered, moving toward the same general area where the team had planned to continue excavating. Initially, researchers considered a much simpler explanation. Perhaps the signal was nothing more than a variation in soil density. But as the data was processed from multiple angles, the shape of the anomaly became increasingly intriguing. Several sections appeared to form straight lines and geometric boundaries beneath the ground. And that immediately raised another question. Could something constructed by humans be buried down there? The possibility was exciting, but the team knew better than to jump to conclusions. Underground scans can produce unusual patterns for many reasons. Changes in geology, underground water, different layers of rock, or even abandoned excavations can all create anomalies that appear strange on a screen. So at this stage, nobody could honestly call the feature a vault, or even a structure. More scans and physical testing would be required. Still, there was one combination that was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. An old iron spike had been recovered from the surface. Wood and additional metal traces had appeared nearby. And now, beneath that same general area, the scanning equipment was detecting what appeared to be a geometric underground pattern. After more than 2 centuries of searching, this was exactly the type of connection Oak Island researchers had been hoping to find. If future testing demonstrated that the pattern was artificial rather than geological, the team could potentially be standing above a previously unknown structure. But then, the investigation revealed something even more interesting. The possible underground path. Once the geometric anomaly had been identified, researchers began scanning the area at greater depth, and the new results changed the picture again. Close to the suspected structure, another elongated underground anomaly appeared to extend farther into the ground. From certain scan angles, its shape resembled a long underground passage or possible tunnel. That immediately became the team's next focus. Researchers began mapping the anomaly's direction by comparing multiple scan lines. The goal was to determine where the feature began, how far it extended, and where it might eventually lead. Then they noticed something potentially significant. The apparent direction of the anomaly seemed to move toward older search areas on Oak Island, locations that have been connected to the island's treasure theories for decades. And that brought one of the most famous locations in the entire Oak Island story back into focus: the Money Pit. If the anomaly eventually proves to be a man-made tunnel, And if its trajectory genuinely connects with the Money Pit search zone, the implications could be enormous. Because that would potentially address one of the oldest questions surrounding Oak Island. If something valuable was deliberately hidden here, how was it transported beneath the island in the first place? Suddenly, the iron spike became important again. Could it have been part of an old wooden entrance? Was it used to reinforce a passage? Could it have secured a structure positioned above the beginning of an underground route? Or was the spike simply marking a location that had nothing to do with the anomaly at all? For now, the evidence was still incomplete. The scan was showing an unusual underground feature, but calling it a tunnel would be premature. Researchers would need physical evidence before making that claim. Even so, its shape, apparent length, and direction had made this investigation far more serious than it initially appeared. And now, the next stage could be decisive. If drilling along the same trajectory uncovers preserved timber, structural materials, or other signs of human construction, the mysterious signal could suddenly become something much more tangible. And that is where the investigation could take its most important turn yet. If further drilling revealed empty spaces, preserved timber, or any other unmistakable evidence of construction, the entire story could change. For the first time, the team now had an opportunity to move beyond computer images and underground scans. Core samples could hold the answer. After the long tunnel-like anomaly appeared beneath the surface, one question dominated the investigation. Was there actually something constructed underground, or were the scans simply detecting a natural geological formation? A screen could suggest an answer, but it couldn't prove one. The only way to know for certain was to physically investigate the layers beneath the ground. So the team began drilling directly into the suspicious area. The drill was positioned over the section where the underground scans had detected their strongest signal. Then it slowly descended, pulling core samples from different depths. Initially, there was nothing unusual. The first samples consisted mostly of ordinary soil and rock. But as the drill went deeper, the underground layers began to look different. Small fragments resembling wood appeared within some of the samples. At the same time, researchers noticed soil layers that seemed different from the natural material surrounding them. That immediately raised an important question. If the wood really was ancient, how had it ended up buried at that depth? The samples were separated and examined more closely. Researchers also searched for traces of metal, unusual materials, or anything else that could potentially be connected to an earlier construction project. And suddenly, several pieces of the investigation were beginning to overlap. Above ground, there was the mysterious iron spike. Nearby, the scans had indicated a possible underground route. Beneath the same general area, geometric anomalies had appeared. And now, drilling had produced wood fragments and unusual soil layers. None of these discoveries, individually, could prove the existence of a $350 million treasure vault. But when independent clues repeatedly appear in the same location and appear to point in the same direction, they become increasingly difficult to dismiss. The next step was laboratory analysis. Researchers needed to determine the age of the wood, establish whether the unusual soil was naturally deposited or had been disturbed by human activity, and investigate whether any metal traces belonged to the same period as the iron spike. If all of these materials turned out to date to the same period, the investigation could finally have something far more valuable than a mysterious scan. It could have a physical chain of evidence connecting the surface discovery to the underground anomaly. The $350 million vault theory. By this stage, the investigation had produced several intriguing clues: an old iron spike, a tunnel-like anomaly, possible wood fragments, and unusual underground soil layers. But the next question was even more dramatic. how large could the suspected underground chamber actually be? Researchers began examining the boundaries visible in the scan data. If those boundaries were genuinely part of a single structure, the feature appeared to be much larger than a simple hole or isolated cavity. It could potentially represent a chamber capable of holding a significant amount of material. And that was when the $350 million theory entered the conversation. But there is an important distinction. That figure did not represent the value of any confirmed treasure. No $350 million treasure had been discovered. Instead, the number came from a hypothetical scenario. If the underground chamber were man-made, and if it contained the kind of valuable material that Oak Island treasure hunters have been searching for over the centuries, its potential value could theoretically reach hundreds of millions of dollars. Gold and silver would obviously be among the biggest possibilities. But there could also be ancient coins, precious metals, jewelry, or historically significant artifacts. And if the chamber contained rare historical objects rather than simply raw precious metals, putting a price on them could become even more complicated. A unique artifact can be worth vastly more than the material from which it was made because of its historical and cultural significance. So, the $350 million figure should be viewed as a dramatic upper-end possibility, not a confirmed valuation. For the team, however, money wasn't even the most important issue. Before discussing treasure, they first needed to answer a much more basic question. Is there actually a chamber beneath the ground? Then, they would have to determine whether it was natural or deliberately constructed. Only after those questions were answered could anyone seriously investigate what might be inside. Still, the developing picture was difficult to ignore. An old spike above the surface, a possible underground route, wood fragments from drilling, unusual soil layers, and beyond them, a large underground target appearing in the scan data. If the suspected route really does lead toward that chamber, then after 230 years, the Oak Island mystery could be approaching one of its most important moments yet. Who could have built it? But even if the underground structure is eventually proven to be real, another mystery immediately emerges, one that could be even more fascinating than the treasure itself. Who built it? If the chamber turns out to be an ancient man-made vault, someone would have needed the knowledge, manpower, tools, and planning required to construct it. One of the most famous theories surrounding Oak Island involves the Knights Templar. For decades, stories and speculation have suggested that Templars, or people associated with them, could have transported valuable objects across the Atlantic and hidden them in a remote location. If the underground construction were eventually shown to be extremely old, those theories would almost certainly return to the spotlight. But the Templar theory isn't the only possibility. Another long-standing explanation involves pirates. Figures such as Captain Kidd have become deeply connected to Oak Island legends. Pirates were known to hide valuable cargo, including gold, silver, and other loot. But there is a major problem with this theory. If the structure beneath Oak Island really consists of a large tunnel system and a substantial underground chamber, constructing it would have required far more than simply burying a chest. It would have demanded careful planning, significant labor, engineering knowledge, and the ability to keep the project hidden